Before we talk about exogenous ketones, I kind of just want to maybe break down ketones and ketosis and get a little bit of a kind of basic framework. And so, Dr. Clarke, I would love if you could maybe just describe for us briefly, what are ketones? What is ketosis, maybe on sort of just a basic level?
Right. Well, ketones, we have mainly two ketones in our body, acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate. They're formed when we haven't eaten for a few hours, say during a fast, or they're formed if you're on a ketogenic diet. So normally that's how you raise your ketone levels. So that's how the increase in beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate happen. So in normal people where they sort of every day eat 3 meals a day and probably in between meals, your ketone levels are very low. However, you can raise them quite considerably by just not eating. So if you haven't eaten for 3 or 6 days, your beta-hydroxybutyrate levels will be quite high, and they're made from fat. And that's because you're mobilizing fat. It goes to the liver, makes ketones, and the ketones are used mainly by the brain because you don't have any carbohydrate in your body. Not any accessible carbohydrate, easily accessible carbohydrate in your body. So you have to feed your brain with something that is somehow either ketones or glucose, and you raise your ketones by mobilizing fat.
And so that is what a process which we would label as endogenous ketosis, because our body is producing ketones, the liver is producing ketones from the breakdown of body fat. And so we also have now this kind of, maybe not new, but this term exogenous ketosis. So what is exogenous ketosis, or what are exogenous ketones?
Well, exogenous ketones, that was a name that was invented by Pete Cox, who was doing the first work on the ketones in Oxford, or on deltaG in Oxford, let's say. And that was, we wanted to be able to produce ketosis in people, in normal people, for the beneficial effects that ketones have on the body. So they're quite different in some ways to endogenous ketones, in that they lower fat instead of raising fat, which is what happens with endogenous produced ketones.
And yeah, I know this is a pretty, we could go pretty deep into this topic, but in general, I know you mentioned that they're a little bit different. I would be under the assumption that kind of the molecular structure, say, of exogenous BHB versus endogenously produced BHB would be similar. But are you aware of any data or any evidence that these physiological effects might be different, in that, is there, say, a beneficial effect that our body receives from the breakdown of fat and the production of ketones that we might not be getting through the exogenous ketones? Just because I know that there's a lot of data, especially, in reviews and articles published from some authors, including John Newman, that, BHB might be this like potent signaling molecule in the body. And so do you think it matters maybe whether it's exogenous or endogenously produced?
It depends on who's making the exogenous ketone. So if they're not very careful, for example, many of the salts, the ketone salts that are quite cheap, are actually a racemate. So they're not, one side of the ketone is what is found in the body. That's the R form, but the S form is not found in the body. And nobody has really studied the effects of the other form of ketone. So to be very careful, we made sure that we only produced the ketone that is found in the body and can't be distinguished from that in the body. So that's the first thing. So some of the products on the market are racemates, and well, I don't want to scare you, but that's what happened with thalidomide, for example. So thalidomide was a really good drug, and it still is a really good drug, but it was being produced as the racemate. And the other side of the drug, the one that wasn't metabolized in the same way as the one that was a painkiller, was causing birth defects. So they just were not careful. And I mean, I have no idea what the other form of ketone does, but it certainly, well, we've avoided it probably because we're old. But I just think that we have to be careful to make exactly what the body can handle.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And, this isn't to say that perhaps the other form, might be super dangerous, but that we may not know the physiological effects. And I would agree that, providing the body with something that it normally sees, kind of the same form that it's going to see when it produces its own ketones endogenously is going to be more beneficial than providing with some maybe foreign or maybe artificial molecule.
And I'll touch on something really quick, and Professor touched on it for a second, but that's why this market is so interesting, because we don't have a lot of the data or studies with some of the products that are being pushed out. We just don't really know what racemic BHB is going to do in the body. Hopefully at some point we can get some studies and really understand, but all the studies we have right now are on non-racemic BHB. So that's really why I think it's important for not only people who are selling the products, but also for consumers to understand really what they're putting in their body.
No, I think that's a great point, Brian. Thanks for adding that. And we will talk about sort of the main differences in many of the exogenous ketones available a little bit later.